BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello everybody, today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? I hope everyone had a good weekend. On Mondays I talk to you guys about the Zodiac Killer, an unidentified serial killer who operated in California in 1968 and 69. Whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about the Zodiac Killer. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Blackbox Ned. And today is St. Patrick's Day, so I would like to say Happy St. Patrick's Day to you all. St. Patrick's Day is March 17th, and March 17th is also the birthday of the Zodiac Killer's victim, Darlene Ferrin, and we're going to be talking about her in just a second. She was murdered by the Zodiac Killer on July 4th of 1969 at the Blue Rock Springs shooting, and the prime suspect in the Zodiac Killer mystery to this day is still Arthur Lee Allen. And some of you may have noticed that I've been talking a lot about Arthur Lee Allen on some of these recent Zodiac Killer news reports, and I think a big reason for that is because about 6 months ago there was a documentary that was made that put Arthur Lee Allen back into the spotlight called This Is the Zodiac Speaking, that was available on Netflix. And there was a YouTube video that was recommended to me from the channel Caleb Jeff, and it's one that I hadn't seen before, so I decided to watch it, and it was called Reasons Why Arthur Lee Allen Isn't the Zodiac Killer. I repeat, is not the Zodiac Killer. So I'm going to play a clip from that because I also think Caleb Jeff's video is going to introduce the subject in a rather clear manner, but there are going to be some major challenges that we're going to have after we play the introduction. Let's listen.
There were 4 confirmed Zodiac Killer attacks. The first attack was done on David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen. Unfortunately, neither of them survived. The second attack was on Michael Mageau and Darlene Ferrin. Michael Mageau would survive, but sadly Darlene Ferrin would pass away. The third attack was on Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard. Cecilia Shepard would survive for a few more days before unfortunately dying from her injuries, but Brian Hartnell would survive. The fourth attack was done on cab driver Paul Stein. Now, right after the third attack, Cecilia Shepard and Brian Hartnell both said that the killer had long hair, long enough to reach the eyelets of the mask he was wearing during the attack. The killer was wearing an executioner-style hood with only eye holes to see out of, meaning that he must have had hair long enough to reach the eyelets of the mask. At the time, Allen was balding. He still had some hair on his head, but it definitely wouldn't have been long enough to reach eyelets of a mask he was wearing. Now, you might say he was wearing a wig, but it would make no sense to be wearing a wig underneath an executioner hood. Now, before this third attack, 3 girls in the area also saw a man wandering around the area suspiciously. Investigators concluded that this man was most likely the killer. Now, all 3 of the girls said that the suspect had hair. They also had a pretty good look at him and had no reason to suspect that he was wearing a wig. And they also called him, quote, nice looking. Some more circumstantial evidence is the fact that Arthur Lee Allen wasn't a match for any of the prints found on Paul Stein's cab. However, these prints could have been from a number of different people. Arthur Lee Allen also wasn't a handwriting match for the Zodiac Killer letters. I know in the documentary they say that he was a match, but this is one person's opinion. Many other handwriting experts have concluded that he was not a handwriting match. In 2003, a DNA sample was pulled off a Zodiac Killer letter. Arthur Lee Allen was not a match for this DNA sample. Arthur Lee Allen was also left-handed. He could write ambidextrously, but he was truly left-handed. Now, Michael Mageau and Brian Hartnell both said that the killer was using his right hand to hold the weapons. And if you were to murder somebody, I would suspect that you would want to use your dominant hand.
And one more time, that was from the channel Caleb Jeff, Reasons Why Arthur Lee Allen Isn't the Zodiac Killer. Now, the first thing that you may have noticed is something that is very relevant to Darlene Ferrin's birthday, and that is that her photo was used twice. For the Zodiac Killer's Lake Herman Road murders, there were 2 victims, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, and the woman that was featured in that video clip was not Betty Lou Jensen, that was Darlene Ferrin, and then Darlene Ferrin was appropriately placed in the correct spot for the Blue Rock Springs shooting. And I just thought that this was a really weird choice because maybe I could give a channel some credit that wasn't that familiar with the Zodiac Killer mystery if they made one episode about Lake Herman Road and then the next week They made an episode about Blue Rock Springs, but the fact that these images are playing one after the other, and they did not realize that that's clearly the same person in the photo. Anyway, that is definitely Darlene Ferrin in the first picture, and that's actually the most famous photo of her. So that was also very surprising. And if you are listening to this on Spotify under the names Black Box Podcast or Black Box True Crime, I invite you to check out the YouTube version for images. But let's look at some of these points that they're saying about Arthur Lee Allen, because 4 years ago, I would have said all of this stuff. I think that this is a very general response to why Arthur Lee Allen was not the Zodiac Killer. And one of the most honest reversals that I have had is I've really begun to wonder, why did Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard say that they could see the hair of the killer at Lake Berryessa from behind the sunglasses? Because there is a show on the channel Mysteries with Mr. Belchique that is hosted by Jerome from Belgium, and I was on there once with Drewzer, another panelist, and we were both talking about how it seemed really bizarre because you don't always have the ability to look through opaque sunglasses. And is it possible at all that maybe they didn't actually see the long hair of the killer going down over the nose and the brow ridge? And perhaps this might be the most ridiculous thing that I've ever said, and if this is the most ridiculous thing that I've ever said, please challenge me in the comments section down below. But is it possible at all that that wasn't actually hair, that those were actually fragments of the hooded costume, like some type of frayed or some type of spliced part of the hooded costume, some sort of fabric that had been placed there in an imperfect way, and it was hidden behind the sunglasses? I mean, to me, that would make a little bit more sense why that is there, because I also think that it would be a little bit weird that someone might not just adjust his hair so it's not in his face and hanging down over his nose when he had the ability to do so when he's walking 50 feet or 50 meters, however long it was, to Brian and Cecilia, because he had a substantial distance. When the Zodiac put on his hood at Lake Berryessa, he was so far from them that even though Cecilia saw the Zodiac without his hood on, she wasn't able to make out any discernible features. So I'd really like to know what you guys think about that. And the other point in this video that I would strongly challenge is that this creator, Caleb Jeff, states that almost with certainty that the Lake Berryessa voyeur with the dark brown hair was indeed the Zodiac Killer. And you guys who follow Black Box Online Radio know that I very clearly take a contrarian stance to that. I do not think that the Lake Berryessa voyeur was the Zodiac. I do not think that that was Arthur Lee Allen. But I don't like this whole explanation of, oh, well, he had hair and Arthur Lee Allen didn't. We've been over that so many times. Yes, there could be explanations, and he even brings up the thing about the wig and so on. But what I think is so much more important to realize is that just because some guy is lurking in the park, checking out 3 girls while they're sunbathing, does not mean he was a murderer. I mean, he's just looking at 3 girls because he thought they were hot. Again, I want to know your responses. Put them in the comments section down below. Anything is always appreciated. Now, the next thing I would like to talk to you guys about here on the Zodiac Killer News Report is that there is a new video on David Oranchak's YouTube channel, Let's Crack the Zodiac. And this is a fascinating video that he did on the 408 Cipher. Now, I watch all of David Oranchak's videos. He is perhaps the leading cipher expert in the world in relation to the Zodiac Killer mystery, and part of the team that helped solve the Zodiac Killer's Z340 cipher back in 2020, after 14 years of effort, mind you. Lots of respect going to David Oranchak. However, when he released this video on the 408 cipher, I knew that I was going to watch it, but I wasn't super enthusiastic because I was thinking, well, the Z408 has already been solved. That was the Zodiac Killer's first confirmed cipher. So, what exactly is he going to say? Well, he did an amazing walkthrough on how the Z408 was solved. I mean, this is the best Zodiac Killer video that I've watched in a long time. And I'm sure that most of you have already seen it, those of you who follow the Zodiac Killer mystery, but just in case you haven't, if you watch any other Zodiac Killer video today, please make it David Oranchak's Let's Crack the Zodiac on the 408 cipher, and the letters that were written by Don Hardin, one of the 2 people that cracked it. The other was Betty Hardin, his wife. And once again, I'm going to play a very short clip where David Oranchak is going to be talking about how the Hardins solved the cipher. Now, the things that you have heard me say on Black Box Online Radio in the past are very simple, and I'm going to share my kind of layman's interpretation of the events. And this is that the Z408 cipher is a substitution cipher, but it is not a simple substitution cipher. It's what I call a multi-substitution cipher. Maybe I'm using the term inappropriately, but that's what I call it, because it's not as simple as one symbol represents one character. And we can see this very clearly because the explanation that I always give to you guys on Zodiac Monday is, when the Hardens were trying to solve this, the Zodiac mailed the 408 cipher in 3 different segments. One to the San Francisco Chronicle, one to the San Francisco Examiner, and one to the Vallejo Times-Herald. And you had to figure out which order to put them in. And then they thought that perhaps this killer is so full of himself that maybe the first letter is going to be I. And David talks all about this in the video too. So the first letter was indeed I. And that was Betty Hardin's idea, who actually put that into practice. So that's I. And then they looked for the double L, which gave them the word kill. And then the second word was like. So I like killing were the first 3 words. And then like gives them the letter E. Okay, now it seems like some of that is fairly accurate. But there is so much more to how the Z408 was solved, because it's not just a simple substitution cipher. And again, in layman's terms, you can just look at that and you can see that the letters don't repeat in the exact ways that you would expect them to repeat to spell out I like killing. You don't have the same double symbols to make I like killing with a simple substitution cipher. So I'm going to play the clip, but again, my layman's introduction is multiple symbols can be used to represent one English letter. And let's hear David give us the introduction.
This third article, but I do see it in the next day's edition of the Examiner. Donald said he was intrigued by the cipher, and by the part of Zodiac's letter where he said, "When they do crack the code, they will have me." Donald felt it was worth trying to crack it because maybe they could help save some innocent lives. He explained that the cipher was in 3 parts, and there was no way to know where it started or ended. So they started counting up all the symbols. They quickly learned the cipher was not simple substitution because the symbol frequencies were not high enough. For example, the most common letter in English is E, which takes up almost 13% of all text. Zodiac's cipher is 408 characters, so we'd expect a symbol standing for E to show up around 50 times. But instead, the most common symbol is the backwards Q, and it only appears 16 times in the whole cipher. The Hardens found out later that it substitutes for M instead of E. Also notice the cipher used not only the regular 26 letters of the alphabet, but a bunch of different symbols and backwards letters. That made them suspect Zodiac was trying to hide his message's letter frequencies by assigning more than one symbol to each plaintext letter. So they looked for repeating patterns in the ciphertext for clues, and immediately noticed places where the same symbol repeated side by side, which might indicate a repeated letter. Here are the cipher patterns Donald drew in his letter to Khan. Let's look at where they appear in the entire 408 ciphertext. Donald wrote that they assumed the filled-in square, half-filled square, and B symbols all stood for the same plaintext letter, and that they were likely to be a double letter. Then they assumed the triangle and P symbols stood for the same letter, since they kept showing up in the same spot near the double letter. They made a similar conclusion with the symbols / and A, that they stood for the same letter, since they are also showing up in the same place relative to the double letter.
And one more time, that was from David Ornchak's YouTube channel, Let's Crack the Zodiac. So, the things that I learned from this video, even though the 408 cipher has been solved, is that there actually was a very large amount of complexity in this cipher. I mean, multi-substitution cipher, that's what I call it, but this goes a little bit far and above and beyond that, because once you see how many symbols are representing one single English letter, this is actually rather intricate Furthermore, the fact that the Zodiac appears to be using more than 26 symbols from the English language, that means that he's really going above and beyond to try and make this a little bit complex. And one thing that is widely believed about the Zodiac Killer is that he expected that the 408 cipher would be solved. I can mostly agree with that, but perhaps he wouldn't have known that it would have been solved as fast as it was. And it seems like Don and Betty Hardin just put in a lot of effort and they put in a lot of work, but they recognized some things, that this was a real code, this was solvable, and they did point that out in the video, that it says, when you solve the cipher, you will have me, or when you crack the code, you will have me. So that type of thinking, I think, was just spot on by Don and Betty Hardin. And yes, there's a theory out there that Don and Betty Hardin went on to become the Zodiac Killer themselves, or that they were the Zodiacs the whole time. Don committed the murders and Betty helped with the creation of the ciphers and the letters. I do not support that theory at all. I even put Don Hardin in my debunking series because I just simply do not think that he was the Zodiac Killer. I think he has the wrong body type, but moreover, this is something that's very important. They are just, by they, I mean anyone who endorses that particular theory, is just looking at someone who is connected to the case and trying to reshape the narrative to make them a person of interest. And I don't think that that's a practical reason. I think that that is just using a very ineffective method. That's taking a suspect and making the evidence fit, versus using the evidence to lead you to a suspect. But some other really interesting observations about the Z408 is perhaps this shows that this person actually had a much higher understanding of codes than I gave the Zodiac credit for, because in the past, I perhaps would have thought of that, alright, the Zodiac Killer seems to know a little bit about codes, right? But nothing you couldn't read up on in the library, right? And then with the 340 cipher, alright, maybe he put some more effort into that one, and he created the 340, which was definitely more intricate, more complex, and more difficult to solve than the 408, because it took the Z340 53 years or whatever it was to be solved, whereas the Z408 was solved relatively fast in 1969. So perhaps the Zodiac really did know a lot more about codes than I gave him credit for. And the final thing is, David Oranchak was really leading toward the final line of the 408 cipher actually being nonsensical or gibberish or filler. The final line of the 408 has 18 characters, and it's referred to as the Z18 code. And people have tried to solve this message for years. People have tried to create solutions to the Z18 code for years. But he was using an explanation that has been talked about on ZodiacCiphers.com, also one that has been discussed in the Zodiac Revisited trilogy by Michael Cole, and that is just that the Zodiac was writing out the symbols for the cipher, and he actually made a mistake when he was dividing it into thirds, and that one line was left out. So the cipher appeared to be uneven, and then with the final line, he had to write in 18 symbols to even it out, and then that ultimately ended up being the Z18 code. So it is purely a mistake on the part of the cryptographer, and the Z18 does not have any precise meaning. Now, if I knew the Zodiac Killer better, I could tell you with 100% certainty. If you had asked me about this 5 years ago, I would have said, that's the perfect answer. But knowing that the Zodiac Killer always seems to surprise us, I mean, 90% I agree with David, as well as with Richard and the other people who've talked about how the Z18 code does not have a specific meaning. It was done for practical reasons. In short, that's nonsensical filler text that was inserted to add a little bit more mystery as to how you're supposed to arrange the pieces of the Z408. But with the Zodiac Killer's activities in the past, he always seems to surprise us. He always seems to have hidden and intricate meanings that are found in things. So I'm not 100% convinced that the Z18 code is meaningless. Just 90%. What do you think? Do you believe that there is a solution to the Z18 code? Have you tried to find a solution to the Z18 code? I would love to know your responses. You can put them in the comments section down below as well. And there was a new interview with Drew Beeson, author of Sighting In on the Zodiac Killer, as well as the host of the Zodcast, and this is available on the channel Interviews with Interesting People, is under the title of The Zodiac Killer, Do You Want to Know a Theory? author Drew Beeson tells us. And it looks like he was interviewed by the guy who wrote the Makvisag journals, which comes up very frequently in the D.B. Cooper circles. One more time, the Zodiac Killer, do you want to know a theory? Author Drew Beeson tells us. And of course, he's not only going to be doing walkthroughs of the Zodiac Killer crime scenes, but also talking about his Zodiac Killer suspect, Donald Lee Cheney. And there is a new video on the channel Real Zodiac Killer Revealed, which is run by Adam Ivester, and this one is talking about something that I thought was very twofold. Of course, nothing that comes out on Real Zodiac Killer Revealed is perfect, however, Adam Ivester actually did find one interesting piece of evidence about his Zodiac Killer suspect, John Parr Cox. The Zodiac Killer stated very clearly in his communications that to find the location of a bomb that the Zodiac Killer had placed, you had to use a mathematical clue involving radians. It concerned radians and inches along the radians. And Adam has pointed out in the past that John Parr Cox was familiar with a surveying instrument called a theodolite that measured things in radians. And in Adam's video, he actually found maps that were used by John Parr Cox that also had radians, and then John Parr Cox actually did surveying with radians on maps almost in the exact same way that the Zodiac Killer talked about using radians to find the location of the bomb. That, I will admit, is a strong point. The second point, though, that he discussed in the video that I thought was not a strong one was that he also used the word along in his explanation about how he was using these radians on the map. This is a quotation from John Parr Cox where it says along the line, and the Zodiac said along the radians. What is the point with that? Seriously, what's the point with that? One person used the word along, and another person used the word along, English language prepositions, old man river, he just keeps rolling along. These are ordinary words that are just spoken by ordinary people. I don't really think that there's any value at all to that particular observation, but I always give credit where I believe credit is due. And now we're going to move on to something else. I was talking to you guys recently about a new Zodiac Killer film that will be coming out to the general public in the near future. Maybe. And it's called Zodiac Killer Project. And this is one that is made by the British film director Charlie Shackleton. Really what happened was he was trying to make a docudrama about the Zodiac Killer book, The Zodiac Killer Cover-Up, also known as The Silent Badge. But that film didn't work out. So what he did was he turned his, I guess you'd say the remnants, or perhaps the footage that he had already recorded, he used that and reshaped it into a documentary called The Zodiac Killer Project, which is now playing on the festival circuit in America, and perhaps it will be made available on streaming and in theaters soon. I've really been searching for release dates or how it's going to be made available to the general public, and it appears that it's just not out right now, although people have reviewed it from the film festivals, particularly the Los Angeles Film Festival, and I'll be discussing some of that. But Charlie Shackleton was actually mentioned in Time magazine, and Time magazine put out an article just a couple days ago called A New Zodiac Killer Documentary Challenges Everything We Think We Know About True Crime. Now, you can hear from that title again. Let me read that again. A New Zodiac Killer Documentary Challenges Everything We Think We Know About True Crime. One of the absolute biggest criticisms of Zodiac Killer Project from the other reviewers on YouTube who saw this film was they were saying that it's called Zodiac Killer Project, but the film did not seem to be extremely Zodiac related. Instead, it actually seemed like it was more just a commentary on the general aspects of the true crime world. And some of you might already be having the instinct where you recognize that the Zodiac Killer mystery is very different than a lot of the other mysteries out there, because it connects with people who don't follow other true crime cases. I mean, I talk to you guys all the time in the comment section. I talk to you guys via email and Facebook, and some people follow only the Zodiac Killer mystery. They don't follow other true crime cases and unsolved mysteries, or some people follow 1 and 2, maybe just the Zodiac and Jack the Ripper, or maybe just the Zodiac and D.B. Cooper. So making these general comments about the true crime world in general might not be the best choice of time for a film, especially one called Zodiac Killer Project. And also, some people are trying to capitalize on the popularity of the Zodiac Killer mystery by discussing content that is not Zodiac Killer related, and this will happen all the time. And even when you're looking at people who have suspects or persons of interest and when they write their books or they make their documentaries, or all types of things that are not Zodiac related in them. But I have to give one piece of credit to Charlie Shackleton. His whole ambition and his whole intention was to make this docudrama based on the Zodiac Killer cover-up. Yes, again, based on a Zodiac Killer book. He wanted the rights to that Zodiac Killer book and to turn it into a dramatic film. So I can understand why he would give it that title, the Zodiac Killer Project. And other people really took exception to the fact that he's using things in almost a humorous way when he's discussing some source material that is based on murder. And I would really have to watch the movie to know how he is presenting the stuff and what context it's used in. But there's another reason why I'm bringing this up to you, because I've read off one article in the past that was discussing the film Zodiac Killer Project, and it's all about the concept. When I was back in high school, I must have been 16 years old, and I was watching a lot of IFC at the time, the Independent Film Channel, which, as I understand, has been completely reshaped and completely revamped since my time as a teenager. But sometimes IFC would show short films that were really focusing on just amateur entrepreneurial content, really things from people who are just making this on their own time. They don't have the full-blown studio productions. They literally were independent films that people are making on their own home computers, and I loved it. I loved every minute of it. And one of the most entertaining films that I watched was actually called Failure, and it is based on the exact same concept as Charlie Shackleton's Zodiac Killer Project. I only watched this movie one time, and I'm even being hesitant to talk to you guys about this because it is purely the type of humor that a 16-year-old male from West Virginia would find funny, and this guy wanted to make a horror film. And he got his friends together, he cast everybody, he put everybody in roles, he had his little budget, he had his camera, and then they just kept messing around. Instead of filming scenes and filming the acting, they just started filming the dog humping the curtains and so on, and his friends making fart jokes and silly noises, and it was absolutely pure entertainment. I mean, that was just like 16 minutes of just absolute focus and engagement on my part, because as I said, I was a teenager and I found that stuff funny at the time. I don't know how much I would like it now, but Charlie Shackleton really tried to do something similar, it sounds like, with his concept, because he wanted to make this drama, and it didn't work out. So he had some footage already filmed, so he's like, I'm going to tell the story of how my dramatic movie didn't work out, and I'm going to turn it into a documentary. And that's exactly what the short film Failure was. But the article in Time magazine is stating this as follows. Director Charlie Shackleton thought he could have his cake and eat it too. For years, Shackleton had been considering the idea of making a documentary centered on the Zodiac Killer, the mysterious and legendary serial killer that haunted the Bay Area in the late 1960s and has been a fixture of pop culture fascination ever since David Fincher's 2007 thriller starring Jake Gyllenhaal to last year's Netflix documentary, This Is the Zodiac Speaking. So, firstly, I think that's giving way too much praise for This Is the Zodiac Speaking. That definitely was not the best documentary ever made. And in fact, I don't even think that documentary is worthy of praise. And we should also point out that there was a very large fascination with the Zodiac Killer mystery well before 2007 and the Fincher film. I mean, ZodiacKiller.com was launched in, 1998? Never mind that the reason why they made the Fincher film was to tell the story of Robert Graysmith, who wrote the book Zodiac, which came out in 1986, and then Gareth Penn released Time 17 in 1987. People have been fascinated by the Zodiac Killer for years. And I do mean this, they were fascinated by the Zodiac Killer mystery for decades prior to the Fincher film. It's just, the Fincher film really did popularize the narrative, and it also brought the Zodiac story to a wide general public audience. But let's keep going with the article here. Charlie Shackleton also steps back to reveal how his movie might have adhered to the tropes of the true crime genre. For instance, the title sequence would have used country-inflected music, but with a dark edge, as it cycled through layered images of landscapes and shadowy men. I was never blind to the many complex ethical lapses of these things, Shackleton explains, and it wasn't, I suppose, until I got my hands dirty, as it were, that I began to engage with those questions more actively. Well, that was a bunch of noise. Do you ever notice when some people give politicians answer? I think that was a politician's answer. The idea for what Zodiac Killer Project eventually became emerged from conversations Shackleton had with friends, the kind of chats he would have at a pub, despite the fact that he legally couldn't obtain a movie based on the book that he wanted to film, Lyndon Lafferty's The Zodiac Killer cover-up. He couldn't let the idea go. Well, credit to that guy. I mean, if he thinks that it would be a good set of source material for a movie, I don't see anything wrong with that. I mean, again, Lyndon Lafferty wrote the book. Whether you like the book or you dislike the book, if this guy thought, that would look pretty good on film, I would like to tell that story on film because he's a filmmaker, I see nothing wrong with that. However, as he saw that, it's a very, very difficult process. Charlie Shackleton says, I started thinking about how it would be to tell my friends, as I had already so many friends at the time. Well, that's a weird statement. But obviously, I was working within the restriction of not being able to adapt the book, not being able to have any of the content of the thing. So what was left without the content? It was like the shape and the feelings that I was convinced people would have felt if only I could have done the thing. Now, that's not a politician's answer. That's just like, all right, well, I want to make a Zodiac Killer movie, and I'm going to make it on Drew Beeson's book, citing it on the Zodiac Killer. But I don't have the right to do that. But what would it be like if I had the right to do that? Except I don't. So here we are. Now this guide went from just completely acceptable to just completely questionable. That was like 0 to 60. I mean, you just bursted your balloon there, Charlie Shackleton. Why can't you just say something directly? I mean, why couldn't you just say, oh yeah, I thought it was a good story, but I didn't have the rights to it, so there I am. So, the shape of the Zodiac Killer Project ultimately took the shape that the Zodiac Killer Project ultimately took proves fascinating in the way Charlie Shackleton calls himself out for the ethical leaps he might have taken. He acknowledges that there's a certain degree of exaggerated glibness in the way he talks about what he might have done, that he doesn't know how far it would have gone in terms of salacious liberties. Yikes. Still, he casually notes calling out his own hypocrisy. He doesn't show the house of Lyndon Lafferty suspect because it didn't look spooky enough for the lair of a potential murderer. Alright, so this guy just went from acceptable to questionable to a little bit dumb, to be honest. I mean, this Time article really did a good job of trying to highlight how ridiculous his thought process was. And as you see, though, I told you guys I try to give credit where credit is due, but if someone is going to do something ridiculous, call them out and say, that's a little bit ridiculous. And it sounds like this guy wanted to make a movie, he wanted to make a docudrama, but it didn't really work out. However, he's already talked about it so much, he just didn't want to back down, so he did something really weird. Being weird is not a crime. That is true, but it might not always look the best on film. And right now, I would like to get to your supporter shoutouts. Anybody can support this channel at buymeacoffee.com. Buymeacoffee.com/blackboxnid88 allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And our first one comes to us from Batman66. Batman66, thank you so much for your regular and consistent support. And Batman66 has also been sharing a lot of resources with the channel, such as some of the content that will be worked into Jack the Ripper episodes for Ripper Wednesday. Every Wednesday I do a segment about Jack the Ripper here on this channel, as well as one every Friday about D.B. Cooper, and there has been a new segment added about the murder of JonBenet Ramsey from 1996. And thank you so much to everyone who has been participating in those discussions. You guys have left so many excellent comments, and for the JonBenet episodes, I've decided to work the comments into every single one, where the first half of the episode will be me talking about some source material, and then I will respond to everyone's questions and comments as a type of interactive Q&A. So please look out for more episodes about JonBenet Ramsey here on Black Box Online Radio. And as for now, the primary focus of this channel is unsolved mysteries that you guys want to hear about, and I can also take recommendations because on Thursdays I will be doing the segment True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, and that is one where any subject is fair game, any subject under the sun or in the darkness. And one more time, you can hit the like button and subscribe if you want to follow along with all of these true crime discussions and unsolved mysteries. And our next shout out goes to River Prawn Pottery, another regular and consistent supporter. River Prawn Pottery, thank you so much. Everything you do is greatly appreciated here on Black Box Online Radio. And of course, we have CZ Guy. CZ Guy has also become a regular and consistent supporter. You three are absolutely amazing. Thank you for everything that you do for Black Box Online Radio. It is greatly, greatly appreciated. Now, the next thing that I have for you guys here on the Zodiac Killer News Report is something from the book Zodiac Killer Fact or Fiction. Now, some of you may have noticed that I've talked about this book in the past, and I haven't talked to you about everything in it, though. Zodiac Killer Fact or Fiction is written by John Bowman, and is really just a list of bullet points. It's about 44 pages long, and each page has 2 different points where John Bowman is attempting to correct falsehoods in the Zodiac Killer mystery. And the one that I have for you this week, and yes, as you see, this is going to be worked regularly into segments here on Zodiac Monday, but the one I have for you this week is that the Zodiac Killer committed the murder of Paul Stine on October 11th of 1969. And there is an urban myth out there that the place where Paul Stine was murdered was his taxi, right? That's not the urban myth. Paul Stine was murdered inside his taxi that he was driving. But the myth is that the taxi is no longer in existence, that the taxi was impounded and destroyed, or SFPD no longer has the taxi. But according to the book Zodiac Killer Fact vs. Fiction, Paul Stine's taxi is still in the possession of SFPD. This is very important, because I've been talking to you guys about a lot of different things, about some YouTube content, and this movie that was coming out in Time magazine. However, when we look at Paul Stine's taxi, this might be the biggest source of evidence that could actually solve the Zodiac Killer mystery. And giving a shout out to Sharon, who appeared on Mysteries with Mr. Belgique, talking about how one avenue that might not have been explored is looking at the seats in Paul Stine's taxi to see if there is DNA that could be obtained from perspiration that was left behind by the Zodiac Killer. Never mind that the Zodiac might have actually left behind partial fingerprints. All of the fingerprint evidence, in my opinion, is questionable, but maybe the Zodiac Killer actually did leave something behind. Maybe the Zodiac even left behind a pair of gloves in Paul Stine's taxi that could have had things like DNA. So, just sharing one page of the book, Zodiac Killer Fact vs. Fiction by John Bowman. Let me know what you think about this as a method to solve the Zodiac Killer mystery. And I would like to talk about a different Zodiac Killer book, and it's one that I've mentioned in the past, and I am working my way through this one, and it's called The Only Time That Richard Got Angry at Me. And this is written by James Bigtwin. This is one where somebody is telling the story of how he knew the Zodiac Killer suspect, Richard Gaikowski. And I'm working my way through this book, so it will also be featured on several different episodes of Zodiac Monday. And I just wanted to share something very briefly. Richard Gaikowski was from Watertown, South Dakota, and he would have been 33 years old at the time of the Zodiac's peak of activity in 1969. And Gaikowski was somebody who got a degree in economics, but primarily had a career in journalism. And when he moves to California, he works for different newspapers, such as the Martinez News Gazette. And then there was a paper called the Express Times, which changed its name to the Good Times. And this is the thing that I wanted to talk to you about. Firstly, it states that Gaikowski might have been writing for the Good Times as early as April of 1969, but his first byline is in June or July of 1969, so that's around the time of the Zodiac's debut. But the most interesting detail that I've read so far is we have the Zodiac Killer's debut letter on July 31st of 1969, partnered with the 408 Cipher, and then we have the Zodiac writing a letter on August 4th, or let's just call it the August 4th letter. We're talking about how postmark date versus receiving date, whatever. The August 4th letter, but the Zodiac is also talking about additional information about what the good times that he had in Vallejo. And then in this book, James Bigtwin writes that Richard Gaikowski would not appear in every issue of the Good Times, even though he was an editor for it. Gaikowski wrote articles for the Good Times newspaper on September 11th of 1969, September 18th of 1969, and then September 25th of 1969. Then, in the next 4 consecutive issues, he did not write. He did not write again until October 30th of 1969. So that is something that just stood out to me as being very, very interesting, because the Zodiac Killer did what 2 days after September 25th? The Lake Berryessa stabbing. the attack on Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, where the Zodiac wore the hooded costume and approached them by gun and stabbed them by knife. The Lake Berryessa stabbing. So Geik is writing consistently throughout the month of September for the Good Times. 2 days before the Lake Berryessa stabbing is his final article. Then he doesn't write for a month. What happens during that time as well? After the Lake Berryessa stabbing, it's only 2 weeks until the Stein murder, the murder of Paul Stein, the taxi driver. Again, these could be some very interesting coincidences, but if I recall from reading the free sample of this book, which I discussed on a previous Zodiac Killer news report, the other title that was going to be used for this book was One F of a Coincidence, because either Gaikowski is the most unlucky man in the world, or he was the Zodiac Killer, because so many things seem to be able to be shaped into narratives involving Richard Gaikowski. Because you guys may have noticed that we've recently seen the passing of Pi Day. Yes, today is St. Patrick's Day. Happy St. Patrick's Day to you all once again. But we also recently passed Pi Day. March 14th, Pi Day. And I've talked to you a lot in the past about Ray Grant's observation about how the word zodiac can contain the alphanumeric value of the word pi, just not in that exact order, because pi, 3.14 and so on. And like, for example, the 3 is the third letter of the alphabet, C, and then number 1 would be the A, and 3.14, that would be D for the 4, and the letters in Zodiac can match up to the alphanumeric value of pi. Richard Gaikowski was born on Pi Day, March 14th. Is that just another coincidence? I mean, possibly. Who really knows at this point, though? And maybe we need to do something like analyze the evidence in Paul Stein's taxi a little bit more. The only problem is that cannot be done by you and me. That is done by law enforcement. And I'm really hoping, based on some of these recent Zodiac Mondays and the discussions that I've had with you, that law enforcement really has a lot more evidence that they're not revealing to the general public. And I'm starting to think that they are. I'm starting to think that they might know a lot more about the Zodiac Killer's DNA than they are leading on. But I would love to know what you guys think. You can put your responses in the comments section down below. And the next thing that I have for you here on Zodiac Monday is something that was sent to me at the email address, blackboxonlineradio@aol.com, and this is from K862, and there was a challenge question, and not exactly a challenge question, more like an inquiry. K862 is asking, have you ever looked at Joseph D'Angelo as a Zodiac Killer suspect? And the answer is yes, I have. Joseph D'Angelo was and is, I guess, the Golden State Killer. We should say he is the Golden State Killer because he is still alive, and really I don't see any major connection between D'Angelo and the Zodiac murders. But the next question was, who do you think wrote Excitement's Crave? Now, prior to being known as the Golden State Killer, this individual, Joseph D'Angelo, was known as the original Night Stalker. Prior to being known as the original Night Stalker, he was known as the East Area Rapist. Prior to being known as the East Area Rapist, he was known as the Visalia Ransacker. And East Area Rapist and original Night Stalker got blended into one, and he was known as Earons for a very long time. For a brief period of time, he was actually known as Ear, and I shouldn't say a brief period of time because Paul Hulse, the investigator in the Golden State Killer case, openly said that he didn't like the name Golden State Killer when it came out, when it was coined by Michelle McNamara, because he had known him as Ear for so long. And I thought that was really interesting because Michelle McNamara stated that one of the reasons why she coined the term Golden State Killer and gave him that name was she just thought that people wouldn't hear the story if the serial killer was simply known as Ear. She said that very clearly prior to her passing. But there was a poem that was written, and it's signed by the East Area Rapist. And K862 is asking me, do I think that who do I think wrote this? Let's have a read. Excitement's Crave. All those mortals surviving birth, upon facing maturity, take inventory of their worth to prevailing society. Choosing values becomes a task. Oneself must seek satisfaction. The selected route will unmask character when plans take action. Accepting some work to perform at fixed pay, but promise for more is a recognized social norm, as is decorum seeking lore. Achieving while others lifting should be a cause for deserving fame. Leisure tempts excitement seeking. What's right and expected seems tame. Jesse James has been seen by all, and Son of Sam has an author. Others now feel temptation's call. Sacramento should make an offer to make a movie of my life that will pay for my planned exile. Just now I'd like to add the wife of a mafia lord to my file. Your East Area rapist and deserving pest. See you in the press or on TV. Now, who do I think wrote that? Well, it's signed by the East Area Rapist, and I don't have too many reasons to doubt that it was written by D'Angelo. But does that sound like the Zodiac Killer? Let's say, hypothetically, if Joseph D'Angelo did write this poem, Excitement's Crave, where someone is claiming that they are the East Area Rapist, does that sound like the Zodiac? I think the only thing in that poem that has an ounce of Zodiac-related material is this line here about how to make a movie of my life that will pay for my planned exile, because the Zodiac did talk about wanting to see a movie that was made about his life, and even this might even tie into some of the unconfirmed communications, where the Zodiac is saying that he is waiting for a good movie to be made about him, he wonders who will play him. Other than that, I think that this language is very different. In fact, I think this language is very technical. Let's look at this here. All those mortals surviving birth upon facing maturity take inventory of their worth to prevailing society. That sounds even a little bit too word dense for the Zodiac. These are very dense sentences, and one review of this poem was written by somebody just saying it's a terrible poem, and I think about 2/3 of it are terrible. There's one stanza that did have a nice flow to it, and it's hard to say anything complimentary about a poem that's signed East Area Rapist, but overall, though, I think it's very dense. It's written by somebody who has a very technical brain, which it seems Joseph D'Angelo did. So I have no reason to doubt that he was the author of this poem, but maybe somebody else wrote it pretending to be the East Area Rapist. The more important thing is the Golden State Killer, East Area Rapist, original Night Stalker, Visalia Ransacker is now behind bars where he belongs. And this goes to show that high-profile true crime cases can be solved, and one day we might see some closure in the Zodiac Killer mystery. And I would like to remind you guys that there is a panel discussion show on the channel Mysteries with Mr. Belgique. I know I'm reminding you now, even though I've said that like 2 times already on the Zodiac Killer News Report, but I'm very excited to talk about it, because I am now going to be one of the regularly featured guests once again on the panel discussion show. Big thank you to Jerome, who runs that channel, and we are going to be working on that mostly on Sundays, I believe. In the past, that one used to come out on Mondays. In addition to Zodiac Monday, you could listen to the panel discussion show, but this one will be coming out on Sundays, perhaps twice a month from now on. The last discussion we had was very good, but in case you didn't hear that, I want to follow up with something. Firstly, we had Jerome, Ross Geraci from Planet X Filmworks, Druzer, and Zach M. joined us in his... I don't know if that was his debut, or that was definitely the first time that I was on the panel with Zach M. And we were discussing a possible Zodiac Killer crime, and that was the Domingos-Edwards murders from 1963. And this is one where I shouldn't say the Zodiac, this is one where the perpetrator approached Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards in a secluded area near Gaviota Beach. They weren't at Gaviota Beach, but close by. That's why it's called the Gaviota shooting. Now, it appears that one of them was tied up, being Robert Domingos. One of them was attacked by the perpetrator. Robert Domingos broke free from the restraints, got into an altercation with the perpetrator, and they both began to run. Then they were gunned down and shot. Their bodies were dragged to a seaside shack. Somebody attempted to set the seaside shack on fire. They were unable to do so, so they simply got out of there. Linda Edwards also had a cut in her swimsuit, which was opened, and her breasts were revealed. So we were discussing this one. And during that episode, I was really listing out all the reasons about how this could have been the Zodiac Killer. Now, many of you will remember that I don't believe that the Domingos-Edwards murders were committed by the Zodiac Killer. However, I did say that there's an 80% chance that it was. Out of all of the unconfirmed Zodiac murders, that has the highest chance of being Zodiac-related. So the issue is that I was not exactly playing devil's advocate. Because the reason I'm talking to you about this now is, I've stated before that I've done a little bit of devil's advocate here on this show, but with true crime cases, I think that it is so much more valuable to talk about what you genuinely think, to talk about what you genuinely believe, instead of just choosing a side and playing a different side. Why not just say the real reasons why you think that something is true, whether you agree or disagree with someone? But what I have found is actually quite valuable is to talk about honest challenges to someone's theory or observations or hypothesis. When someone tells you, here's what I think happened, you can make honest challenges. And I did a lot of that when I was discussing the case with Zach M, because I was telling him all of the reasons about how I thought that, the Zodiac could have committed the Domingos-Edwards murders, as it could have been part of a full circle theory, if you will, because the Domingos-Edwards murders of 63 is very similar to the Lake Berryessa stabbing of 69. And the biggest reason is, someone might say it's impossible, and Zach didn't say it's impossible, but hypothetically, if someone says to you that, it's impossible that someone would do this for that reason, you can just say, now wait a second, it's not impossible. I don't know what happened, but here's an honest challenge to that claim. And the honest challenges that I put forward about how this, just this whole claim about how that this is not the Zodiac, and let's look at some reasons why this would be the Zodiac, the interpretations of the evidence. It would be that the Zodiac committed the Domingos-Edwards murders. It's a pre-Zodiac crime, and it went out of control. The Zodiac killed the victims. He was successful in killing both of the victims, but his ambition was not really even to kill. It was to maintain power, and it was so sloppy, and the victims almost got away. One of them maybe even punched him in the face and injured him to the point where he might have been debilitated for a second. He viewed that as a failure, so he would never take credit for that in his crimes, because the Zodiac wanted to remain in control the whole time. Is that really what happened? I mean, I think that that's a reasonable interpretation of the evidence, and that is a combination of things about what I genuinely think, as well as from you guys in the comment section. Because one of you guys wrote this out very clearly in the comments down below, when you said that the reason why you thought it was the Zodiac Killer and he dragged the bodies to the seaside shack was he was trying to set them on fire because he felt like a failure. He felt like this whole murderous fantasy that he had went completely awry. He messed it up, so he was trying to burn his failure out of shame. And that is something, though, where I can understand how someone is arranging it. Remember, to debate somebody, first you have to understand them. You have to understand what the claims are. And I can understand that claim. I'm just still stating that there's insufficient evidence to say that that was the Zodiac 100%. Now, you can weigh in the comment section down below about the Domingos-Edwards murders. You can weigh in about, do you think it's valuable to debate true crime cases? And let's also talk about some of the other points that have been discussed in this episode. What do you think about Arthur Lee Allen as the Zodiac Killer suspect? Do you think that the Z18 code is real? What do you think about Richard Gaikowski as a Zodiac Killer suspect? Do you believe we have evidence to solve the Zodiac Killer mystery in Paul Stine's taxi? And, you can also leave some clues about John Parr Cox, or leave some comments about the clues related to John Parr Cox as a Zodiac Killer suspect, and please share anything else. Anybody can write the show at blackboxonlineradio at AOL.com. You could also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is Ned DeHaan, and there is always BlackboxNed88 over on Instagram. And I will see you over there. Good.